Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most profound, sweeping societal transformations in human history. We're going to trace a journey that didn't just move a group of people from point A to point B, but completely rewired how human beings live together, how they govern themselves, and really, how they understand their place in the world. We're looking at the Hijrah, the absolute foundation of the Islamic revolution. To really grasp the magnitude of this, we have to start with a massive, almost impossible question. How did a fiercely persecuted message, held by a very small group of people facing constant, literal danger, manage to survive, let alone transform into a complete civilization-building system? It's a completely remarkable historical arc, with stakes that quite literally changed the course of global history. So we're going to explore exactly how that happened, framing this entire narrative as a massive journey of radical transformation. All right, Section 1, a world divided by power, pre-Islamic Arabia. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand the cure, you really have to understand the disease, right? Before Islam, the Arabian Peninsula was a harsh, unforgiving environment. It was plagued by deep tribal conflicts, widespread moral decline, and severe social injustice. The Old World was built entirely on power, not fairness. The strong ruled with absolute impunity. There was zero accountability. If you were weak, or if you happened to fall outside the protection of a powerful tribe, you were essentially defenseless. Tribal conflicts basically dictated everyday life. But then entered the new vision, a radical alternative proposing absolute fairness and the bold idea of equality before one creator. Now, this wasn't just a difference of opinion, it was an absolute existential clash of worldviews.
Moving on to Section 2, the spark of equality, a revolutionary message.
Right in the thick of this turbulent, totally power-driven environment in the city of Mecca, a revolutionary message was introduced by the Prophet Muhammad. He brought forward the concept of monotheism. Now, that might sound primarily like a theological shift, but as our sources show, it carried massive, immediate social implications. The core idea was that all humans are equal before one creator. So, the crucial point is, this wasn't just some spiritual awakening. It was a profound declaration of social justice. In a society where your bloodline, your wealth, and your tribal affiliation determined your entire worth and even your physical safety, declaring that every single human being is entirely equal, that was earth-shattering. This idea directly and immediately challenged the existing social and political order of Mecca.
Which brings us to Section 3, conviction against the resistance, facing pushback.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Because, people in power rarely just give up the status quo without a fight. We start at Phase 1, with the message spreading quietly among close companions. But as it enters Phase 2 and becomes public, the pushback was fierce. The leaders of Makkah weren't just annoyed, they were terrified. They saw this message as a direct threat to their authority, and crucially, to their economic interests. So, the early followers of Islam faced intense persecution, devastating social boycotts, and incredibly severe hardships just for holding on to these beliefs. But here is the fascinating historical reality. Despite this immense, crushing pressure, the movement didn't collapse. Actually, scratch that. It didn't just survive, it grew stronger. These early believers survived not because they had wealth or political power. They had absolutely neither. They survived because they were driven by deep emotional and spiritual conviction and purpose. That undeniable resilience leads directly to Phase 3, the Hijrah, which ultimately paves the way to Phase 4, a completely functioning system.
All right, Section 4, the Hijrah, a turning point. Let's zoom in on that critical transition from Makkah to Medina. It is the hinge upon which this entire history swings. Facing escalating danger, the early Muslims undertook this migration. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that it's vital we don't just view this as people fleeing in the night. It was a highly strategic, monumental leap into the unknown. The Hijrah wasn't merely a relocation. It wasn't just an escape from persecution. As our source material clearly outlines, the Hijrah was the active establishment of a new, structured system. It was the physical transition required to take these radical ideas of equality and justice out of the realm of pure theory and put them into actual daily practice. They weren't just leaving an old city behind, they were actively laying the groundwork for an entirely new civilization.
Which leads us to Section 5, building a just society, the masterclass in community. Once the Prophet and his followers arrived in Medina, the true work of governance began. This era in Medina is essentially a historical masterclass in community building. I mean, think about it. They had a blank slate, a diverse and complex population, and a set of core values. How do you weave all of that together into a society that doesn't just survive its early days, but thrives for centuries? Well, they did it by establishing 3 absolutely non-negotiable pillars: justice, brotherhood, and law.
The Prophet Muhammad structured this new society meticulously around these concepts. Justice meant that the old ways of the strong preying on the weak were officially over. Accountability was now universal. Brotherhood meant taking fiercely loyal, previously warring tribes and weaving them into a single, unified community that actually cared for one another. And law provided the framework, the agreed-upon rules of the road that ensured fairness wasn't just a nice idea, but a protected, living reality for everyone.
And this brilliantly illustrates the grand arc of our explainer today. We started in Mecca with a revolutionary, highly persecuted message. But through the crucible of the Hijrah, it evolved into a functioning civilization in Medina. It wasn't simply a change in geography, folks. It was a total transformation of human behavior, of society, and of governance. The abstract promise of equality became the concrete, everyday reality of a functioning state.
Which leaves us with something incredibly important to consider. As we look at our own modern world, which, let's be honest, is so often struggling with its own deep divisions, inequalities, and social fractures, how might these ancient principles of conviction, equality, and justice be the exact blueprint we need to build stronger, more resilient communities right now? It's a piece of history, for sure, but its core lessons on community building and the pursuit of a genuinely just society are as urgently relevant today as they were over a millennium ago. Thank you so much for exploring this with me.